Charles Edward Anderson Berry was an American singer, songwriter and guitarist, and one of the pioneers of rock and roll music. Nicknamed the "father of rock and roll," he refined and developed rhythm and blues into the major elements that made rock and roll distinctive with songs such as Maybellene, Roll Over Beethoven, Rock and Roll Music, and Johnny B. Goode. Writing lyrics that focused on teen life and consumerism, and developing a music style that included guitar solos and showmanship, Berry was a major influence on subsequent rock music. Born into a middle-class African-American family in St. Louis, Berry had an interest in music from an early age and gave his first public performance at Sumner High School. While still a high school student, he was convicted of armed robbery and was sent to a reformatory, where he was held from 1944 to 1947. After his release, Berry settled into married life and worked at an automobile assembly plant. By early 1953, influenced by the guitar riffs and showmanship techniques of the blues musician T-Bone Walker, Berry began performing with the Johnnie Johnson Trio. His break came when he traveled to Chicago in May 1955 and met Muddy Waters, who suggested he contact Leonard Chess, of Chess Records. With Chess, he recorded Maybellene, Berry's adaptation of the country song, Ida Red, which sold over 1 million copies, reaching number 1 on Billboard magazine's Rhythm and Blues chart. By the end of the 1950s, Berry was an established star, with several hit records and film appearances and a lucrative touring career. He had also established his own St. Louis nightclub, Berry's Club Bandstand. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison in January 1962 for offenses under the Mann Act. He had transported a 14-year-old girl across state lines. After his release in 1963, Berry had several more successful songs, including No Particular Place to Go, You Never Can Tell, and Nadine. However, these did not achieve the same success or lasting impact of his 1950s songs, and by the 1970s he was more in demand as a nostalgic performer, playing his past material with local backup bands of variable quality. In 1972 he reached a new level of achievement when a rendition of My Ding-a-Ling became his only record to top the charts. His insistence on being paid in cash led in 1979 to a 4-month jail sentence and community service, for tax evasion. Berry was among the first musicians to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on its opening in 1986. He was cited for having laid the groundwork for not only a rock and roll sound but a rock and roll stance. Berry is included in several of Rolling Stone magazine's Greatest of All Time lists. He was ranked 5th on its 2004 and 2011 lists of the 100 greatest artists of all time. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 songs that shaped rock and roll includes 3 of Berry's, Johnny B. Goode, Maybellene, and Rock and Roll Music. Berry's Johnny B. Goode is the only rock and roll song included on the Voyager Golden Record. Early life. Born in St. Louis, Berry was the youngest child. He grew up in the North St. Louis neighborhood known as the Ville, an area where many middle-class people lived. His father, Henry William Berry, was a contractor and deacon of a nearby Baptist church. His mother, Martha Bell, was a certified public school principal. Berry's upbringing allowed him to pursue his interest in music from an early age. He gave his first public performance in 1941 while still a student at Sumner High School. He was still a student there in 1944. When he was arrested for armed robbery after robbing 3 shops in Kansas City, Missouri, and then stealing a car at gunpoint with some friends. Berry's account in his autobiography is that his car broke down and he flagged down a passing car and stole it at gunpoint with a non-functional pistol. He was convicted and sent to the Intermediate Reformatory for Young Men at Algoa, near Jefferson City, Missouri, where he formed a singing quartet and did some boxing. The singing group became competent enough that the authorities allowed it to perform outside the detention facility. Berry was released from the reformatory on his 21st birthday in 1947. On October 28, 1948, Berry married the Meta Toddy Suggs, who gave birth to Darlin Ingrid Berry on October 3, 1950. Berry supported his family by taking various jobs in St. Louis, working briefly as a factory worker at 2 automobile assembly plants and as a janitor in the apartment building where he and his wife lived. Afterwards he trained as a beautician at the Poro College of Cosmetology, founded by Annie Turnbow Malone. He was doing well enough by 1950 to buy a small 3-room brick cottage with a bath on Whittier Street, which is now listed as the Chuck Berry House on the National Register of Historic Places. By the early 1950s, Berry was working with local bands and clubs in St. Louis as an extra source of income. He had been playing blues since his teens, and he borrowed both guitar riffs and showmanship techniques from the blues musician T-Bone Walker. He also took guitar lessons from his friend Ira Harris, which laid the foundation for his guitar style. By early 1953, Berry was performing with Johnnie Johnson's Trio, starting a long-time collaboration with the pianist. The band played blues and ballads as well as country. Berry wrote, "Curiosity provoked me to lay a lot of our country stuff on our predominantly black audience, and some of our black audience began whispering, 'Who is that black hillbilly at the Cosmo?' After they laughed at me a few times, they began requesting the hillbilly stuff and enjoyed dancing to it." In 1954, Berry recorded the tracks, "I Hope These Words Will Find You Well," and, "Oh, Maria," with the group Joe Alexander and the Cubans. The songs were released as a single on the Ballad label. Berry's showmanship, along with a mix of country tunes and R&B tunes, sung in the style of Nat King Cole set to the music of Muddy Waters, brought in a wider audience, particularly affluent white people. Career 1955 to 1962. Signing with Chess. Maybellene, to Come On in May 1955. Berry traveled to Chicago, where he met Muddy Waters, who suggested he contact Leonard Chess, of Chess Records. Berry thought his blues music would interest Chess, but Chess was a larger fan of Berry's take on Ida Red. On May 21, 1955, Berry recorded an adaptation of the song, Ida Red, under the title, Maybellene, with Johnnie Johnson on the piano, Jerome Green on the maracas, Ebby Hardy on the drums and Willie Dixon on the bass. Maybellene sold over 1 million copies, reaching number 1 on Billboard magazine's Rhythm and Blues chart and number 5 on its Best Sellers in Stores chart for September 10, 1955. Berry said, "It came out at the right time when Afro-American music was spilling over into the mainstream pop." When Berry first saw a copy of the Maybellene record, he was surprised that 2 other individuals, including DJ Alan Freed, had been given writing credit that would entitle them to some of the royalties. After a court battle, Berry was able to regain full writing credit. At the end of June 1956, his song, Roll Over Beethoven, reached number 29 on the Billboard's Top 100 chart, and Berry toured as one of the top acts of '56. He and Carl Perkins became friends. Perkins said that, "I knew when I first heard Chuck that he'd been affected by country music. I respected his writing. His records were very, very great." In late 1957, Berry took part in Alan Freed's Biggest Show of Stars for 1957, touring the United States with the Everly Brothers, Buddy Holly, and others. He was a guest on ABC's Guy Mitchell Show, singing his hit song, Rock and Roll Music. The hits continued from 1957 to 1959, with Berry scoring over a dozen chart singles during this period, including the U.S. Top 10 hits, School Days, Rock and Roll Music, Sweet Little 16, and Johnny B. Goode. He appeared in 2 early rock and roll movies, Rock Rock Rock, in which he sang, "You Can't Catch Me," and Go, Johnny, Go, in which he had a speaking role as himself and performed Johnny B. Goode, Memphis, Tennessee, and Little Queenie. His performance of Sweet Little 16 at the Newport Jazz Festival in 1958 was captured in the motion picture Jazz on a Summer's Day. The opening guitar riff of Johnny B. Goode is surprisingly similar to the one used by Louis Jordan in his Ain't That Just Like a Woman. Berry acknowledged the debt to Jordan, and several sources have indicated that his work was influenced by Jordan in general. By the end of the 1950s, Berry was a high-profile established star with several hit records and film appearances and a lucrative touring career. He had opened a racially integrated St. Louis nightclub, Berry's Club Bandstand, and invested in real estate. But in December 1959, he was arrested under the Mann Act after allegations that he had had sexual intercourse with a 14-year-old Apache waitress, Janice Escalante, whom he had transported across state lines to work as a hat-check girl at his club. After a 2-week trial in March 1960, he was convicted, fined $5,000, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He appealed the decision, arguing that the judge's comments and attitude were racist and prejudiced the jury against him. The appeal was upheld, and a second trial was heard in May and June 1961, resulting in another conviction and a 3-year prison sentence. After another appeal failed, Berry served 1½ years in prison, from February 1962 to October 1963. He had continued recording and performing during the trials, but his output had slowed as his popularity declined. His final single released before he was imprisoned was "Come On." 1963 to 1969. Nadine, and moved to Mercury when Berry was released from prison in 1963. His return to recording and performing was made easier because British invasion bands, notably the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, had sustained interest in his music by releasing cover versions of his songs, and other bands had reworked some of them, such as the Beach Boys' 1963 hit, "Surfin' USA", which used the melody of Berry's "Sweet Little 16". In 1964 and 1965 Berry released 8 singles, including 3 that were commercially successful, reaching the top 20 of the Billboard 100. "No Particular Place to Go", "You Never Can Tell", and the rocking "Nadine". Between 1966 and 1969 Berry released 5 albums for Mercury Records, including his second live album, Live at Fillmore Auditorium. For the live album he was backed by the Steve Miller Band. Although this period was not a successful one for studio work, Berry was still a top concert draw. In May 1964, he had made a successful tour of the UK, but when he returned in January 1965 his behaviour was erratic and moody, and his touring style of using unrehearsed local backing bands and a strict non-negotiable contract was earning him a reputation as a difficult and unexciting performer. He also played at large events in North America, such as the Schaefer Music Festival, in New York City's Central Park in July 1969, and the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival Festival in October. 1970 to 1979. Back to Chess. My Ding-a-Ling, to White House concert. Berry returned to Chess from 1970 to 1973. There were no hit singles from the 1970 album Back Home, but in 1972 Chess released a live recording of My Ding-a-Ling, a novelty song which he had recorded in a different version as My Tambourine, on his 1968 LP From St. Louis to Frisco. The track became his only #1 single. A live recording of Reelin' and Rockin', issued as a follow-up single in the same year, was his last top 40 hit in both the US and the UK. Both singles were included on the part live, part studio album The London Chuck Berry Sessions. Berry's second tenure with Chess ended with the 1975 album Chuck Berry, after which he did not make a studio record until Rocket for Atco Records in 1979, which would be his last studio album for 38 years. In the 1970s Berry toured on the strength of his earlier successes. He was on the road for many years, carrying only his Gibson guitar, confident that he could hire a band that already knew his music no matter where he went. AllMusic said that in this period his live performances became increasingly erratic. Working with terrible backup bands and turning in sloppy, out-of-tune performances, which tarnished his reputation with younger fans and old-timers alike. In March 1972 he was filmed, at the BBC Television Theatre in Shepherd's Bush, for Chuck Berry in Concert, part of a 60-date tour backed by the band Rocking Horse. Among the many bandleaders performing a backup role with Berry in the 1970s were Bruce Springsteen and Steve Miller when each was just starting his career. At the request of Jimmy Carter, Berry performed at the White House on June 1, 1979. Berry's touring style, traveling the «oldies» circuit in the 1970s, added ammunition to the Internal Revenue Service's accusations that Berry had evaded paying income taxes. Facing criminal sanction for the third time, Berry pleaded guilty to evading nearly $110,000 in federal income tax owed on his 1973 earnings. Newspaper reports in 1979 put his 1973 joint income at $374,982. He was sentenced to 4 months in prison and 1,000 hours of community service, performing benefit concerts, in 1979. 1980 to 2017. Last year's on the road Berry continued to play 70 to 101 nighters per year in the 1980s, still traveling solo and requiring a local band to back him at each stop. In 1986, Taylor Hackford made a documentary film, Hail! Hail! Rock and Roll, of a celebration concert for Berry's 60th birthday, organized by Keith Richards. Eric Clapton, Etta James, Julian Lennon, Robert Cray, and Linda Ronstadt, among others, appeared with Berry on stage and in the film. During the concert, Berry played a Gibson S355, the luxury version of the S335 that he favored on his 1970s tours. Richards played a black Fender Telecaster Custom, Cray a Fender Stratocaster and Clapton a Gibson S350T, the same model that Berry used on his early recordings. In the late 1980s, Berry bought the Southern Air, a restaurant in Wentzville, Missouri. In November 2000, Berry faced legal issues when he was sued by his former pianist Johnnie Johnson, who claimed that he had co-written over 50 songs, including No Particular Place to Go, Sweet Little 16, and Roll Over Beethoven, that credit Berry alone. The case was dismissed when the judge ruled that too much time had passed since the songs were written. In 2008, Berry toured Europe, with stops in Sweden, Norway, Finland, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Ireland, Switzerland, Poland, and Spain. In mid-2008, he played at the Virgin Festival in Baltimore. During a concert on New Year's Day 2011 in Chicago, Berry, suffering from exhaustion, passed out and had to be helped off stage. Berry lived in Ladue, Missouri, approximately 10 miles west of St. Louis. He also had a home at Berry Park, near Wentzville, Missouri, where he lived part-time since the 1950s and was the home in which he died. This home, with the guitar-shaped swimming pool, is seen in scenes near the end of the film Hail! Hail! Rock and Roll! He regularly performed one Wednesday each month at Blueberry Hill, a restaurant and bar located in the Delmar Loop neighborhood of St. Louis, from 1996 to 2014. Berry announced on his 90th birthday that his first new studio album since Rocket in 1979, entitled Chuck, would be released in 2017. His first new record in 38 years, it includes his children, Charles Berry Jr. and Ingrid, on guitar and harmonica, with songs covering the spectrum from hard-driving rockers to soulful thought-provoking time capsules of a life's work, and dedicated to his beloved wife of 68 years, Toddy. Physical and sexual abuse allegations. In 1987, Berry was charged with assaulting a woman at New York's Gramercy Park Hotel. He was accused of causing lacerations of the mouth, requiring 5 stitches, 2 loose teeth, contusions of the face. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of harassment and paid a $250 fine. In 1990, he was sued by several women who claimed that he had installed a video camera in the bathroom of his restaurant. Berry claimed that he had had the camera installed to catch a worker who was suspected of stealing from the restaurant. Although his guilt was never proven in court, Berry opted for a class action settlement. One of his biographers, Bruce Pegg, estimated that with 59 women it cost Berry over $1.2 million plus legal fees. His lawyer said he had been the victim of a conspiracy to profit from his wealth. During this time Berry began using Wayne T. Schoenberg as his legal counsel. Reportedly, a police raid on his house found intimate videotapes of women, one of whom was apparently a minor. Also found in the raid were 62 grams of marijuana. Felony drug and child abuse charges were filed. As the child abuse charges were dropped, Berry agreed to plead guilty to misdemeanor possession of marijuana. He was given a 6-month suspended jail sentence, placed on 2 years unsupervised probation and was ordered to donate $5,000 to a local hospital. Later, videos Berry recorded of himself urinating on a woman and another of her defecating on him would surface. Death on March 18, 2017. Berry was found unresponsive at his home near Wentzville, Missouri. First responders called to the scene were unable to revive him, and he was pronounced dead by his personal physician. TMZ posted an audio recording on its website in which a 911 operator can be heard responding to a reported cardiac arrest at Berry's home. Berry's funeral was held on April 9, 2017, at the Pageant, in Berry's hometown of St. Louis. He was remembered with a public viewing by family, friends, and fans in the Pageant, a music club where he often performed, with his cherry red Gibson S335 guitar bolted to the inside lid of the coffin and with flower arrangements that included one sent by the Rolling Stones in the shape of a guitar. Afterwards, a private service was held in the club celebrating Berry's life and musical career, with the Berry family inviting 300 members of the public into the service. Gene Simmons of Kiss gave an impromptu, unadvertised eulogy at the service, while Little Richard was scheduled to lead the funeral procession but was unable to attend due to an illness. The night before, many St. Louis area bars held a mass toast at 10 p.m. in Berry's honor. One of Berry's attorneys estimated that his estate was worth $50 million, including $17 million in music rights. Berry's music publishing accounted for $13 million of the estate's value. The Berry estate owned roughly half of his songwriting credits, while BMG Rights Management controlled the other half. Most of Berry's recordings are currently owned by Universal Music Group. In September 2017, Dualtone, the label which released Berry's final album, Chuck, agreed to publish all his compositions in the United States. Berry is interred in a mausoleum in Bellerive Gardens Cemetery in St. Louis. Legacy: a pioneer of rock and roll. Berry was a significant influence on the development of both the music and the attitude associated with the rock music lifestyle. With songs such as Maybellene, Roll Over Beethoven, Rock and Roll Music, and Johnnie B. Goode, Berry refined and developed rhythm and blues into the major elements that made rock and roll distinctive, with lyrics successfully aimed to appeal to the early teenage market by using graphic and humorous descriptions of teen dances, fast cars, high school life, and consumer culture, and utilizing guitar solos and showmanship that would be a major influence on subsequent rock music. Thus Berry, the songwriter, according to critic John Pareles, invented rock as a music of teenage wishes fulfilled and good times. Berry contributed three things to rock music: an irresistible swagger, a focus on the guitar riff as the primary melodic element, and an emphasis on songwriting as storytelling. His records are a rich storehouse of the essential lyrical, showmanship and musical components of rock and roll. In addition to the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, a large number of significant popular music performers have recorded Berry's songs. Although not technically accomplished, his guitar style is distinctive. He incorporated electronic effects to mimic the sound of bottleneck blues guitarists and drew on the influence of guitar players such as Carl Hogan and T-Bone Walker to produce a clear and exciting sound that many later guitarists would acknowledge as an influence in their own style. Berry's showmanship has been influential on other rock guitarists, particularly his one-legged hop routine, and the «duck walk», which he first used as a child when he walked, stooping with full bended knees, but with my back and head vertical, under a table to retrieve a ball, and his family found it entertaining. He used it when performing in New York for the first time, and some journalist branded it the «duck walk». On July 29, 2011, Berry was honored in a dedication of an 8-foot, in-motion Chuck Berry statue in the Delmar Loop in St. Louis, right across the street from Blueberry Hill. Berry said, "It's glorious. I do appreciate it to the highest, no doubt about it. That sort of honor is seldom given out. But I don't deserve it." The rock critic Robert Christgau considers Berry the greatest of the rock and rollers, and John Lennon said, "If you tried to give rock and roll another name, you might call it Chuck Berry." Ted Nugent said, "If you don't know every Chuck Berry lick, you can't play rock guitar." Bob Dylan called Berry the Shakespeare of rock and roll. Bruce Springsteen tweeted, "Chuck Berry was rock's greatest practitioner, guitarist, and the greatest pure rock and roll writer who ever lived." When asked what caused the explosion of the popularity of rock and roll that took place in the 1950s, with him and a handful of others, mainly him, Berry said, "Well, actually they begin to listen to it, you see, because certain stations played certain music. The music that we, the blacks, played, the cultures were so far apart, we would have to have a PlayStation in order to play it. The cultures begin to come together, and you begin to see one another's vein of life, then the music came together." Among the honors Berry received were the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 1984 and the Kennedy Center Honors in 2000. He was ranked 7th on Time magazine's 2009 list of the 10 best electric guitar players of all time. On May 14, 2002, Berry was honored as one of the first BMI icons at the 50th annual BMI Pop Awards. He was presented the award along with BMI affiliates Bo Diddley and Little Richard. In August 2014, Berry was made a laureate of the Polar Music Prize. Berry is included in several of Rolling Stone magazine's Greatest of All Time lists. In September 2003, the magazine ranked him number 6 in its list of the 100 Greatest Guitarists of All Time. In November, his compilation album The Great 28 was ranked 21st in Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time. In March 2004, Berry was ranked 5th on the list of The Immortals, the 100 Greatest Artists of All Time. In December 2004, 6 of his songs were included in Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time. Johnnie B. Goode, Maybellene, Roll Over Beethoven, Rock and Roll Music, Sweet Little 16, and Brown-Eyed Handsome Man. In June 2008, his song, Johnnie B. Goode, was ranked first in the 100 Greatest Guitar Songs of All Time. The journalist Chuck Klosterman has argued that in 300 years Berry will still be remembered as the rock musician who most closely captured the essence of rock and roll. Time magazine stated, "There was no one like Elvis. But there was, definitely, no one like Chuck Berry." Rolling Stone magazine called him, "the father of rock and roll, who gave the music its sound and its attitude, even as he battled racism, and his own misdeeds, all the way," reporting that Leonard Cohen said, "All of us are footnotes to the words of Chuck Berry." Kevin Strait, curator of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., said that Berry is one of the primary sonic architects of rock and roll. Chuck Berry was among hundreds of artists whose material was reportedly destroyed in the 2008 Universal Studios fire. According to Cleveland.com, Chuck Berry didn't invent rock and roll all by his lonesome. But he was the man who took rhythm and blues and transformed it into a new genre that would ever change popular music. Songs like Maybellene, Johnnie B. Goode, Roll Over Beethoven, and Rock and Roll Music would showcase the core elements of what rock and roll would become. The sound, the format and the style were built on the music Berry created. To some extent, everyone who followed was a copycat.